The cathedral smelled of incense and cold stone, a scent that wrapped around grief like a burial shroud. Candle smoke drifted upward in ghostly spirals, disappearing into the vaulted ceiling where shadows pooled like spilled ink. Stained glass saints looked down with empty eyes, their fractured light bleeding cold gold across the polished casket at the altar. Clara's fingers trembled against the funeral program, the paper soft and damp from her grip. Her body felt heavy, drained, as if sorrow had seeped into her marrow and replaced her bones with lead. She couldn't remember walking to the front of the cathedral. Couldn't remember the eulogies or the hymns that had echoed off ancient stone. Everything had dissolved into a gray fog, punctuated only by the relentless ache in her chest. The kind of pain that made breathing feel like an act of rebellion against a universe that had stolen everything. The casket waited, open. Her feet moved without permission, carrying her forward on legs that threatened to buckle with each step. The polished wood gleamed under the golden light, and inside, God, inside, lay a body that looked exactly like Emmett. Too still, too perfect, like a wax figure in some macabre museum exhibit. His suit was pressed, his hands folded across his chest, his face peaceful in a way he'd never been in life. Clara's hand reached out, trembling, and touched the back of his cold fingers. Ice. Marble. Wrong. A sob tore from her throat, raw and animal. She fumbled with her left hand, twisting the wedding band free, the simple gold ring he'd slipped on her finger 3 years ago, promising forever in a voice rough with emotion. Her fingers curled around it, the metal still warm from her skin, and she placed it carefully in the casket beside his folded hands. "I love you," she whispered, her voice breaking like glass. "I'll always love you." Then she collapsed forward, her body folding over the edge of the casket, face twisted with a grief so profound it seemed to reshape her features. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. She pressed her forehead against the cold wood, breathing in the chemical smell of embalming fluid and expensive flowers, trying to memorize this final moment because after this there was nothing. Just emptiness stretching forward like an endless winter. In the shadowed balcony above, hidden behind stone pillars carved with weeping angels, Emmett Calloway watched his own funeral. His tie was loosened, the collar of his white shirt dark with sweat despite the cathedral's chill. Bruises mottled his knuckles, fresh from the fight that had saved his life and ended it simultaneously. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached as he watched Clara crumble over that casket, over the body double the syndicate had prepared with surgical precision. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to run down those stairs and pull her into his arms, to tell her it was all a lie, that he was here, alive, breathing. His fingers gripped the iron railing until the metal bit into his palms, until his knuckles went bone white and his hands trembled with the effort of staying still. "Boss." The whisper came from his right, from Marcus, his right-hand man, the only person besides the cleanup crew who knew the truth. "We've got confirmation. Cade Syndicate thinks you're dead. They've already started moving on your territory." Emmett didn't respond. Couldn't. His throat had closed around words that would never reach Clara. Below, she was remembering. He could see it in the way her body seized, in the way her hands clenched against the casket's edge. She was remembering the day they'd told her. The convoy hit, the explosion, the sealed casket she'd tried to open while officers held her back, her screams echoing through the morgue. Let me see him. Please, God, let me see him. They'd told her the body was too damaged. Told her it was better to remember him whole. She'd collapsed in that sterile hallway, and Emmett had watched the security footage later. Had watched his wife shatter while he hid in a safe house with a bullet wound in his shoulder and blood on his hands. The memory cut him, now sharp and deep. Clara's mind spiraled backward, dragging her to another moment, another lifetime. She'd been working a double shift at Sinclair's, the kind of upscale restaurant where servers were invisible furniture, refilling water glasses for people who spent more on appetizers than she made in a week. Her feet had throbbed in cheap heels. Her stomach had been empty, growling beneath her pressed white shirt. She'd been fantasizing about her cramped apartment with its broken radiator when she'd walked directly into him. Not metaphorically. Literally collided with 6 feet of solid muscle, wrapped in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. Time had fractured into slow motion, her tray of wine glasses tilting, dark red liquid arcing through the air in elegant streams. Her heart stopping as she'd realized she was about to destroy someone's $1,000 outfit and lose the job she desperately needed. But Emmett's hands had caught her, steadied her. His cologne, cedar and smoke and something darker, had wrapped around her senses as his calm voice murmured, "Easy, I've got you." His eyes had been gray steel, softened by something she'd later learn was kindness buried under layers of danger. He'd smiled, actually smiled, as wine dripped from his sleeve and said, "I was getting bored of this party anyway." That memory cut her now like glass pressed into an open wound. The gentleness in his voice. The way he'd stayed at the restaurant until her shift ended, ordering coffee after coffee just to make sure she was okay. The way he'd walked her to her car and actually asked, if he could see her again. Clara finally pulled away from the casket, her legs barely supporting her weight. She turned, hollow and shattered, and walked down the center aisle. Each step echoed through the cathedral like a countdown to her new life, a life without him, without hope, without the man who'd somehow made her believe she deserved more than survival. From the balcony, Emmett watched her go. His jaw trembled, his vision blurred. He wanted to call out, wanted to break this necessary lie into 1,000 pieces and damn the consequences. But the Cade Syndicate had put a price on his head, had killed his men, had planned to use Clara as leverage, as bait, as a weapon against him. The only way to keep her safe was to die. So he stayed in the shadows, a ghost at his own funeral, and whispered into the empty air between them, "I'm sorry, Clara. I'm so damn sorry." Then he turned and disappeared into the cathedral's dark corridors, leaving his wife to mourn a man who still breathed, still bled, still loved her with every broken piece of his shattered heart. The house breathed silence. Clara stood in the entryway, keys still clutched in her trembling hand, and the quiet pressed against her eardrums like water at depth. No hum of the refrigerator, no tick of the hallway clock Emmett had insisted on buying at that estate sale. No creak of floorboards under his weight as he moved through rooms with that predatory grace that always made her pulse quicken. Just silence. Empty, suffocating silence that filled her lungs like smoke. She kicked off her heels, the funeral black pumps landing askew on the hardwood, and walked deeper into the house they'd shared. Past the living room where they'd argued about paint colors and made love on the couch during thunderstorms. past the kitchen where he'd burned breakfast every Saturday morning with stubborn determination. Past the wedding photo on the hallway table, both of them laughing, her in ivory lace, him in a perfectly tailored suit with his tie already loosened because he'd never been comfortable in formal clothes. She couldn't look at it, couldn't bear the way younger Clara smiled up at younger Emmett like he'd hung the moon and promised her forever. Forever had lasted 3 years. Clara collapsed onto the couch, still wearing her black dress, still wearing the grief like a second skin she couldn't shed. The fabric bunched around her thighs. Her stockings had a run from kneeling at the cathedral. She stared at the ceiling, at the water stain in the corner they'd never gotten around to fixing, and felt the loneliness settle over her like a weighted blanket designed to crush rather than comfort. The house creaked. Just the foundation settling, she told herself. Old houses did that, made noise, breathed, existed even when the people inside them wanted to disappear. She closed her eyes, breathed, and smelled cedar. Her eyes snapped open. She sat up so fast her vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges. That scent, Emmett's cologne, the expensive kind he ordered from some boutique in Milan, the kind that clung to his shirts and his pillows and the collar of the leather jacket he wore when he didn't want to look like the dangerous man he actually was. It hung in the hallway, faint but unmistakable. "Stop it," she whispered to the empty room. To her fractured mind, "He's dead, you're imagining things." But the scent lingered, and her heart hammered against her ribs like something caged and desperate. She forced herself to stand, to walk to the kitchen, to pour a glass of water with hands that shook so badly the liquid sloshed over the rim. She set the glass on the counter, stared at it, reminded herself to breathe, to think, to not spiral into the kind of grief madness that turned widows into ghosts haunting their own lives. The bedroom called to her with the promise of oblivion, sleep, unconsciousness, a few hours where she wouldn't have to feel this crushing weight. She walked down the hallway, past that wedding photo she still couldn't look at, and pushed open the bedroom door. The curtains fluttered, gentle, rhythmic, like someone had just walked past them. But the windows were closed, locked, the way she'd left them this morning before the funeral, before she'd buried a lie in a cathedral and walked away from everything. Clara's breath caught. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She crossed to the window, checked the latch, secure, untouched. The curtains hung still now, as if they'd never moved, as if she'd imagined that impossible flutter. "Grief makes you crazy," she told herself, voice thin and brittle. "That's all this is. You're tired, you're broken, you're seeing things that aren't there." She turned away from the window and froze. The glass of water she'd left on the kitchen counter now sat on her nightstand. Condensation beaded on the outside. The water inside still rippled, as if someone had just set it down. Clara's knees threatened to buckle. Her hand shot out, gripping the door frame for support as the room tilted sideways. She hadn't brought the glass in here, hadn't walked from the kitchen to the bedroom with it. She would remember that. She would remember carrying water, setting it down, the simple physical act of moving through space. But there it sat, undeniable, impossible. She backed out of the bedroom, heart racing, and nearly tripped over her own feet. The hallway stretched longer than it should. The front door suddenly seemed miles away. She reached for the knob, needed air, needed space, needed to not be in this house where dead men left water glasses and phantom cologne trails. The metal was warm, not cold like brass should be, not room temperature. Warm, like someone had just gripped it from the other side. Clara jerked her hand back with a gasp, stumbling backward into the hallway table. The wedding photo crashed to the floor, glass shattering in a starburst pattern that threw fractured reflections across the walls. "This isn't real," she whispered, then louder, "This isn't real." But when she finally steadied herself, when she finally caught her breath, she looked down at the nightstand visible through the bedroom door. Emmett's watch sat there, the vintage Rolex he'd worn every day since his father died, the one that had been on his wrist during the ambush, the one the police told her was destroyed in the explosion along with everything else. Except it wasn't destroyed. It was here, on her nightstand, ticking. Clara's legs gave out. She slid down the wall, landing in a heap amid broken glass and splintered frame, and pressed both hands over her mouth to trap the scream building in her chest. Logic warred with longing. Grief battled with impossible hope. Every rational thought in her head said she was hallucinating. That trauma had fractured her mind into pieces that no longer fit together properly. But the watch kept ticking. She crawled forward, glass biting into her palms, and made it to the bedroom. Made it to the nightstand. Reached out with shaking fingers and touched the watch face. Real, solid, warm from being worn. And on her vanity mirror, written in faint black marker, still wet enough to smudge, "You are not alone." The handwriting was familiar, slanted, confident, his. Clara's world tilted violently. She gripped the nightstand, breaths coming in sharp gasps, and a memory slammed into her with the force of physical violence. A night 6 months before the ambush, Emmett's face serious in the lamplight, his voice low and urgent as he'd pulled her close. "Clara, I need you to listen. I have enemies, dangerous ones. If anything happens to me, nothing's going to happen," she'd interrupted, pressing her fingers to his lips. But he'd caught her hand, held it against his chest where she could feel his heart beating steady and strong. "If anything happens to me, it won't be by accident. Do you understand? It won't be random. It won't be bad luck." She'd nodded, not understanding, not wanting to understand, just wanting to stop talking about death and danger and all the darkness that lived in the spaces between his carefully constructed lies. Now that memory felt like prophecy, like warning. Like a message from a man who'd known he was running out of time. Clara wiped her eyes, smearing mascara and tears across her cheeks, and stood on legs that barely supported her weight. She needed air, needed to think, needed to prove to herself she wasn't losing her mind in this house full of ghosts and impossible signs. She walked to the front door, stepping over broken glass, and pulled it open. A small burner phone sat on the doorstep. Black, cheap, anonymous. The kind of phone people used when they didn't want to be traced. Clara picked it up with numb fingers. The screen lit at her touch, no password, no security, just a single contact saved in the directory. E. Her thumb hovered over the name. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her temples, in every pulse point of her body. The dead don't leave shadows. The dead don't move water glasses or write on mirrors or leave phones on doorsteps. But maybe, God, maybe, Emmett wasn't dead at all. The Cade Syndicate thinks they've won. They think Emmett Calloway is dead and buried, and Clara is just another widow left behind, broken, vulnerable, alone. They're wrong. But here's the thing. The Cades are still out there. Still watching. Still hunting. And if you want to see Clara and Emmett burn their empire to the ground, if you want to watch a love story that survived death itself take on one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the city, then you need to choose a side. Drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from. Your city, your country, wherever you are in this world. Because this story is about fighting back, about refusing to stay down, about two people against impossible odds. And if you're Team Clara and Emmett, if you want to see them win, hit that subscribe button because the Cades won't stop coming. The war is just beginning, and Chapter 3 is where everything explodes. Don't let the Syndicate win by staying silent. Where are you watching from? Comment below. Subscribe now. Let's finish this. Clara paced the length of the living room, burner phone clutched in her white-knuckled grip. 17 steps from the couch to the window. 17 steps back. The carpet wore a path under her frantic movement, and outside the night pressed against the glass like something alive and watching. Call him. Don't call him. Call him. Don't. The internal argument had been raging for 3 hours. 3 hours of wearing a groove in the floor. 3 hours of staring at that single contact saved under E. 3 hours of her mind fracturing between impossible hope and the certainty that she was losing her grip on reality. Dead men didn't leave phones. Dead men didn't write on mirrors. Dead men didn't exist outside of memory and grief and the hollow spaces they carved into the people left behind. But the watch was real. The scent was real. The warmth of the doorknob against her palm had been undeniably, impossibly real. What if she called and no one answered? What if this was some elaborate cruelty? Some trick her shattered psyche was playing to avoid accepting that Emmett was gone forever? What if she heard a stranger's voice, and the last fragile thread of hope snapped and left her drowning in a grief so deep there was no surface, no air, no way back? But what if God? What if it really was him? Her thumb hovered over the call button, pressed down, lifted, pressed down again. The phone rang first. The sudden vibration in her hand made Clara yelp, nearly dropping the device. The screen lit up, E calling. 2 words that shouldn't exist, that violated every law of death and reality and the finality of loss. Her heart stopped. Actually stopped, then kick-started with a painful lurch that left her gasping. The phone rang again, insistent, demanding. Clara's finger found the answer button and pressed before her rational mind could override the desperate hope clawing through her chest. She lifted the phone to her ear, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Then, Clara. 1 word. Her name. Spoken in a voice she'd heard in her dreams every night for 6 months. A voice she'd thought she'd never hear again outside the prison of memory. Emmett's voice. Rough. Pained. Real. The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering to the hardwood floor. Clara's legs gave out and she crumpled beside it, hands pressed over her mouth, a sound tearing from her throat that was part sob, part scream, part something too primal to name. Clara? Clara, are you there? Please, baby, talk to me. His voice crackled from the phone's speaker, tinny and distant but unmistakably his, and something inside Clara detonated. She snatched the phone up, brought it to her ear, and screamed. What kind of sick game is this? Is this some kind of, who are you? Who the fuck are you? Clara, it's me. It's Emmett. I need you to know. She was on her feet now, pacing again, but frantic this time, wild. No, you're dead. I went to your funeral. I touched your body. I buried you. That wasn't me. His voice cracked on the words, raw, with an emotion she couldn't identify. Clara, please, I need you to calm down and listen to me. Calm down! Calm down! Hysteria bubbled up her throat, acidic and choking. I mourned you, I buried you, and now some cruel asshole is using your voice to... You put our wedding ring in the casket. The words cut through her spiral like a blade. You whispered that you'd always love me. You collapsed over the side, and your shoulders shook so hard I thought you'd break apart. Clara froze. The world tilted. No one knew that. No one had been close enough to hear her whisper, to see exactly how she'd fallen. How? Her voice came out strangled. How do you know that? Because I was there. His voice dropped to something close to a sob. In the balcony, behind the pillars. I watched the whole thing and it nearly killed me, Clara. I'm so sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry, but I need you to listen to me right now because you're in danger. I can't. Her mind was fracturing, reality splitting into versions that didn't fit together. This isn't possible. Someone is coming. Urgency sharpened his words. You need to leave the house right now. Don't pack anything. Don't think. Just get in your car and drive. No. The word came out flat, decisive. Anger was replacing shock, burning through the haze of disbelief. No, I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what the hell is happening. If this is really, you owe me answers, Emmett. You owe me the fucking truth. Clara, there's no time. Make time. She was shouting now, voice echoing through the empty house. You let me think you were dead. You let me bury you. You destroyed me. So no, I'm not leaving until you... Glass exploded inward. The living room window shattered in a spray of glittering shards, and Clara's scream died in her throat as dark figures poured through the opening. 3 men, 4, ski masks, guns. Clara! Clara! Emmett's voice roared from the phone. Hide! Get somewhere safe right now! But she was frozen, paralyzed by the sudden invasion of violence into her quiet grief. One of the men turned toward her, gun rising, and instinct finally kicked in. Clara dove behind the couch as the first gunshot cracked through the air, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Wood splintered. Stuffing exploded from the couch cushions. Clara crawled on her hands and knees toward the hallway, phone still clutched in one hand. Emmett's voice a distant shout she couldn't process over the roar of blood in her ears. More gunshots, shouting. The front door exploding inward with a crash that shook the walls. Then a different sound. Controlled, precise bursts of gunfire and men screaming. Clara pressed herself into the corner where the hallway met the bedroom, making herself as small as possible, and watched through the gap as chaos erupted in her living room. The masked men were firing at someone new, someone who moved like smoke and violence, someone whose silhouette was painfully, impossibly familiar. Emmett. She saw him for a heartbeat, broad shoulders, dark clothing, face partially hidden, before he disappeared behind the overturned couch. More gunfire, a body hit the floor, another. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the house, mixing with something copper and wrong. Then silence. Ringing, absolute silence broken only by her own ragged breathing. Clara? His voice came from the living room, hoarse and urgent. Clara, Where are you?" She couldn't answer, couldn't move, couldn't process any of this. The attack, the violence, the impossible fact that Emmett Calloway was alive and standing in her destroyed living room. He appeared in the hallway, and Clara's world stopped. Emmett. Not a ghost. Not a hallucination. Real and solid and breathing hard, his shirt torn, blood on his knuckles, a fresh bruise blooming across his jaw. His gray eyes found hers through the shadows, and something in his expression shattered. "Clara!" She launched herself at him, fists first, hitting his chest, his shoulders, anywhere she could reach. A sound like a wounded animal tearing from her throat. "I hate you! I hate you! How could you? How dare you?" But her hits lost force, dissolving into something desperate and clutching as her fingers twisted in his shirt, and she collapsed against him, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. His arms came around her, solid, warm, alive, and she felt his body shaking too, felt him bury his face in her hair and whisper broken apologies against her temple. "I'm sorry. God, Clara, I'm so sorry. I had no choice. I had to keep you safe. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." She couldn't speak, could only cling to him and sob, and feel the impossible reality of his heartbeat against her cheek, proof that death had lied, that grief had been premature, that everything she'd endured for 6 months had been built on a foundation of necessary lies. "We have to move." His voice was rough against her hair. "More will come. We're not safe here." She nodded against his chest, incapable of argument, incapable of anything except holding on to him like he might disappear again if she let go. Emmett scooped her up, one arm under her knees, one behind her back, and carried her through the wreckage of their home, through the shattered glass and splintered furniture and bodies she refused to look at. A black SUV idled in the driveway, back door open, engine running. He settled her in the back seat, buckled her in with shaking hands, and pressed his forehead to hers for one brief, desperate moment. "We're not safe here," he whispered. "I'll explain everything, I promise." Then he was in the driver's seat, and they were moving, and Clara watched her house, her life, her grief, her 6 months of hell disappear in the rearview mirror as the night swallowed them whole. Clara woke to unfamiliar shadows and the distant hum of city traffic muted by bulletproof glass. Her body ached, muscles stiff from unconsciousness, throat raw from screaming, chest tight with the residual panic of gunfire and shattering windows. For a confused moment she thought she was home, that the previous night had been another grief nightmare, another trick her damaged mind played in the dark hours before dawn. Then she saw him. Emmett sat in a leather chair near the floor-to-ceiling windows, silhouetted against the pre-dawn glow of a city she didn't recognize. He hadn't changed clothes, still wore the torn black shirt, still had blood dried on his knuckles, still looked like a man who'd fought through hell to get here. His elbows rested on his knees, head bowed, the picture of exhaustion and something heavier. Defeat, maybe, or the crushing weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. He looked up as she stirred, gray eyes finding hers across the room, and the relief that flickered across his face was so raw it hurt to witness. "You're awake." His voice was rough, like he'd been screaming too, or crying. "How do you feel?" How did she feel? The question was absurd. She felt like reality had been shredded and poorly reassembled, like grief had been a lie and relief was complicated by rage. like the man she'd mourned was sitting 6 feet away and she didn't know whether to kiss him or kill him. "Where are we?" Her own voice came out hoarse, brittle. "Safe house, penthouse level. Nobody knows about this place except Marcus and me." He stood slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. "Clara, I need to explain." "Then explain." She sat up, pulling the blanket someone had draped over her closer. "Explain how you let me bury you. Explain how you watched me fall apart. Explain how any of this was justified." Emmett flinched like she'd struck him. Good. She wanted him to hurt the way she'd hurt for 6 months. Wanted him to feel even a fraction of the agony that had carved her hollow. He moved to sit on the edge of the bed, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. The ambush was real. The Cade Syndicate had been planning it for weeks. My intel told me they weren't just coming for me, they were coming for you. Clara's breath caught. "What?" "Their plan was to take you alive, use you as leverage, force me to hand over territory, assets, everything I'd built." His hands clenched into fists. "I've seen what the Cades do to people, Clara. I've seen the bodies, the survivors who aren't really surviving anymore, and I couldn't—" His voice cracked. "I couldn't let that happen to you. So you faked your death. I staged the ambush before they could. Used a body double. A man from the morgue, already dead, similar build. Made it look like I'd been killed in the explosion." He met her eyes, unflinching. "The Cades bought it. Everyone bought it, including you." "Including me," she echoed, voice shaking with barely contained fury. "You let me mourn you. You let me destroy myself with grief. You let me stand over your casket and—" A sob choked off her words. "I know." His jaw clenched. "Clara, I know, and I'm sorry, I'm so goddamn sorry. But if they'd known I was alive, they would have come for you immediately. The only way to keep you safe was to make you believe the lie, too, to make everyone believe it. What have you been doing for 6 months?" The question came out cold, clinical. "While I was falling apart, what were you doing?" "Hunting them." Simple, direct, brutal. Dismantling their operation piece by piece. Taking out their safe houses, their weapons caches, their money. I've been at war, Clara. A war I had to fight alone because if anyone knew I was alive, I would have been in danger. Yes, I understand the logic." She stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air. "But you betrayed me, Emmett. You made a choice for both of us without giving me any say. You decided my safety was worth my sanity." "It was." His voice turned fierce, desperate. "Your life was worth any price, worth your hate, worth you never forgiving me, worth—" He broke. Clara watched in stunned silence as Emmett Calloway, the man who'd built an empire on control and calculated violence, who never showed weakness, never cracked, buried his face in his hands and shook with sobs that sounded like they were tearing him apart from the inside. "Watching you at that funeral," the words came out strangled, broken. "Seeing you collapse over that casket, knowing I'd done that to you, knowing I'd caused that pain, it almost killed me, Clara. I wanted to run down those stairs, wanted to tell you everything, but I couldn't. I had to watch you break and do nothing. I had to be the reason you suffered, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life." She should have felt vindicated, should have felt satisfied that he was hurting too. But watching him fall apart just made everything worse, made the anger and relief and confusion tangle into something too complicated to name. Clara turned away, needing to move, and found herself in the hallway. The penthouse was sleek and modern, all steel and glass and cold surfaces. She wandered, trying to process 6 months of lies compressed into one impossible night, and found a door slightly ajar at the end of the hall. She pushed it open, and her world tilted again. The room was dark except for the glow of multiple monitors, security feeds, dozens of them, and photographs, printed and pinned to a corkboard like some obsessive detective's case wall. Except every single photo was of her. Clara at the grocery store. Clara leaving the cemetery. Clara sitting in her parked car with her head on the steering wheel. Clara walking through their front door. Clara collapsed on the couch in the same black funeral dress she'd worn yesterday. Her hands trembled as she moved closer. A notebook sat open on the desk, filled with Emmett's handwriting. Dates, times, observations written in clinical detail. November 3rd, 2:47 a.m., Clara woke screaming, cried for 20 minutes before falling back asleep. November 18th, Clara visited the cemetery, stayed for 2 hours. Didn't eat anything all day. December 2nd, found her sleeping in my closet, holding one of my shirts. Page after page, weeks of surveillance, proof that while she'd been drowning in grief, he'd been watching every second, documenting every tear, bearing witness to her suffering from the shadows. Clara, she spun. Emmett stood in the doorway looking stricken, exposed in a way she'd never seen him. You watched me. Her voice shook. Every day, every night, you watched me fall apart. I had to make sure you were safe. Had to know if the Cades made a move. You watched me cry myself to sleep. The accusation exploded from her. You saw me break and you did nothing. What was I supposed to do? His voice rose to match hers. Reveal myself and put you in immediate danger? Let the Cades know I was alive so they could kidnap you? There was no good choice, Clara. Just variations of terrible. She stared at him, at this man who'd orchestrated his own death, who'd dismantled a criminal empire alone, who'd watched her suffer for months while fighting a war in the shadows. The obsession in this room was terrifying. The depth of his surveillance was a violation, but it was also proof that he'd never really left, that while she'd been mourning, he'd been present in the only way he could be, a ghost keeping watch, a dead man refusing to let her go. If you lie to me again, Clara's voice came out steady, cold, even once, about anything, I walk. I don't care if the Cades are waiting outside. I don't care if staying means dying. If you can't give me complete honesty after everything you've taken from me, then we're done. Do you understand? Emmett nodded, something like hope flickering in his exhausted eyes. Complete honesty, I promise. No more lies. She believed him. God help her, she believed him. Clara walked past him, back down the hallway to the main room where she'd first woken. A large table dominated one wall, covered in maps and photographs and documents. A war room, she realized. Evidence of the battle Emmett had been fighting alone while she grieved. She stood before it, taking in the scale of the threat. The Cade Syndicate wasn't just dangerous, they were massive, organized, ruthless, and Emmett had been dismantling them piece by piece, one violent operation at a time. He appeared beside her, silent, waiting. Clara looked at the maps marked with red X's, at the photographs of men who wanted them both dead, at the magnitude of what they were facing. Then she looked at Emmett. Bruised, exhausted, real and alive, and impossibly here. She sat down at the war table, pulled one of the files closer. "What do we do now?" she whispered. And for the first time since she'd learned he was alive, Emmett's expression shifted into something that looked almost like hope. The call came at dawn. Marcus burst through the penthouse door, phone in hand, face grim. They know. The Cades know she's alive. Clara watched Emmett's expression shift from exhaustion to something colder, harder, the face of a man who'd built an empire on calculated violence. He took the phone, listened in silence, then ended the call with a single word. When? 72 hours, maybe less. Marcus glanced at Clara, then back to Emmett. They're mobilizing everything. This is it, the final play. Emmett nodded slowly. Already moving into commander mode, the vulnerable man who'd broken down in front of her last night disappearing behind layers of control. Get the team ready. I want full surveillance on every known Cade property. Triple security here and... He paused, jaw clenching, and arranged transport for Clara, somewhere remote, somewhere they'll never find her. No. The word cut through the room like a blade. Both men turned to look at her. No, Clara repeated, standing from where she'd been sitting at the war table, hands planted flat on the surface covered in maps and death. I'm not running, I'm not hiding. I'm done being the person you protect by keeping in the dark. Clara! Emmett's voice held warning and desperation in equal measure. Don't. She moved around the table, coming to stand before him, unflinching despite the dangerous energy radiating from every line of his body. You made that choice once. You decided my safety was worth destroying me. You don't get to make it again. This is different. They know you're alive now. They'll come for you. Then let them come. Her voice didn't waver. But I stand beside you when they do, not hidden away in some safe house waiting to find out if you survived. Not locked in ignorance while you fight alone. Not again, Emmett, never again. He shook his head, something like panic flickering behind his eyes. You don't understand what you're asking. The Cades don't just kill people, Clara. They destroy them. They make you wish for death. And if they get their hands on you because I was too selfish to send you away... Selfish? She laughed, sharp and bitter. You think keeping me with you is selfish? You watched me from the shadows for 6 months. You documented every tear. You carried the weight of my grief while fighting a war alone. That was selfish, Emmett. Sending me away now, making decisions for me like I'm something fragile that needs to be locked away. That's selfish too. I'm trying to keep you alive. I don't want to just be alive. The words exploded from her. Years of being treated like something breakable, finally shattering. I want to live, and I can't do that wondering if you're breathing, if you're hurt, if this time you're really dead. You taught me that when you faked your death. You taught me that existing without you isn't living. It's just surviving, and I'm done surviving. Silence crashed through the room. Emmett stared at her like she'd struck him, breathing hard, fingers flexing at his sides like he wanted to reach for her but didn't trust himself to touch. Marcus cleared his throat. I'll give you 2 a minute. He disappeared through the door, closing it quietly behind him. Clara stepped closer, close enough to see the bruise darkening along Emmett's jaw, the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the desperate conflict written across every feature. If you send me away, I will spend every second terrified, waiting for news, imagining the worst, just like the last 6 months. Is that what you want? No. His voice came out strangled. God, no. But Clara, if something happens to you because of me, then something happens. But it happens with me choosing to stand beside you instead of you choosing my fate for me. She reached up, cupping his face in her hands. Feeling the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor that betrayed how close he was to breaking. I'm not asking for permission, Emmett. I'm telling you how this is going to be. You either trust me enough to let me in completely, or you don't. But you don't get to protect me by keeping me ignorant. Not anymore. His hands came up to cover hers, pressing them harder against his face like he was trying to memorize the touch. When he spoke, his voice was rough with surrender. Okay, you stay. And you'd tell me everything. Everything. Clara pulled him down, pressing her forehead to his, breathing in the scent of him, cedar and smoke, and something uniquely Emmett that she thought she'd never smell again. Show me the plan. All of it. They returned to the war table, and for the next hours Emmett laid out everything. The Cade Syndicate structure, a hydra of criminal enterprise spanning weapons, drugs, human trafficking. His 6-month campaign of systematic destruction. Safe houses burned, money seized, key players eliminated. The final assault he'd been building toward, the one that would cut the head off the snake. He showed her the brutal reality of his world without flinching, without softening the edges. Showed her crime scene photos, surveillance footage, the bodies left in his wake. Showed her the man he'd become in the shadows. Ruthless, efficient, willing to do terrible things in the name of justice and protection. And Clara absorbed it all, the violence, the darkness, the impossibility of loving a man who lived in perpetual warfare. She chose him anyway. When he finished, when the full scope of the threat and his response lay bare between them, Emmett leaned back and met her eyes with something close to resignation. You can still leave. I can make the Cades believe you died in the attack on the house. Fake your death the way I faked mine. You'd be free of all this, free of me. You could start over somewhere safe, somewhere clean. I'd disappear completely. You'd never have to see me again. The offer hung in the air between them, genuine and devastating. He was giving her an escape route, giving her permission to walk away from the man who'd caused her 6 months of agony, who lived surrounded by death and danger, who could never promise her a normal life. Clara looked at the war table, at the maps marked with violence, at the photographs of men who wanted them dead. Then she looked at Emmett, scarred, dangerous, impossibly alive. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them until she stood between his knees where he sat at the table's edge. Her hands framed his face, forcing him to hold her gaze. When you faked your death, she whispered, you took my life with you. I wasn't living, Emmett. I was just going through motions, empty, hollow, surviving but not alive, and I realized something in that cathedral, standing over your casket. Her voice strengthened. I realized that I would rather have one dangerous, uncertain day with you than a lifetime of safe, empty ones without you. His eyes closed, jaw clenching against emotion. So no, Clara continued, I'm not leaving, I'm not starting over, I'm not letting you disappear. We finish this together, we live together, or we don't, but either way, I choose you. I choose us. I choose this, whatever this is. Emmett's arms came around her waist, pulling her flush against him, his face buried in the curve of her neck. She felt him shaking, felt the dampness of tears against her skin, felt the years of control and isolation finally cracking open. "I don't deserve you," he whispered against her throat. "Probably not." She threaded her fingers through his hair. "But you're stuck with me anyway." They dismantled the Cade Syndicate over the next 60 hours. Clara didn't fight. That wasn't her role. But she coordinated, communicated, kept Emmett grounded when the violence threatened to consume him completely. She was his anchor, his reason, the thing that reminded him he was still human beneath the necessary brutality. When it was over, when the last Cade lieutenant was in custody and the organization lay in ruins, Emmett took her home. Not to the penthouse, not to a safe house. Home. To the house they'd shared, the one with the shattered window now repaired, the bullet holes patched, the blood scrubbed from the hardwood. Clara stood in their bedroom. The same bedroom where she'd found his watch on the nightstand, where impossible hope had first taken root. She opened the drawer of her jewelry box and pulled out a simple gold band, the match to the one she'd buried with the body double. Emmett watched from the doorway, silent. She crossed to him, took his left hand in both of hers, and slid the ring onto his finger. It settled into place like it had never left, like the last 6 months had been erased, like death had been nothing more than a bad dream. "No more secrets," she said firmly. "Not from me. Not ever." "No more secrets," he promised. Voice rough. "Not from you." She pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him, and feeling his heartbeat steady and real against her cheek. Outside, the world continued its violent rotation. Danger still existed. Enemies still lurked in shadows. Their life would never be simple or safe, but they would face it together. Partners, equals. Two people who'd survived death and grief and impossible choices and come out the other side still choosing each other. I buried him once, Clara thought, pressing closer to the solid warmth of Emmett's chest, feeling his arms tighten around her like he'd never let go. I'm never doing it again.